The day we buried my father, the world didn't just lose a good man. I lost the only person who had ever truly seen me. His casket hadn't even settled in the ground when something in my mother's eyes turned cold. They say grief makes people act strange. But what I saw in her wasn't grief. It was something darker, something I'd spend years trying to survive. My name is Sally Reynolds. I was just a quiet, timid girl growing up in Frankenmuth, Michigan. Folks remember our family as church-going and respectable. My mother, Margaret Reynolds, taught Sunday school. My father, Henry Reynolds, ran the local auto shop and whistled hymns while he worked. We were never rich, but we had warmth, laughter, and a piano my daddy bought secondhand just so I could learn to play. But after Daddy died, that warmth vanished. I was only 10 when he passed. I still remember holding his calloused hand in the hospital room, whispering my favorite lullaby while the heart monitor fell silent. At the funeral, neighbors hugged us, brought casseroles, and told me to be strong for Mom. I tried. God knows I tried. But when the door closed behind us that night, my mother changed. She took down every picture of him. She boxed up his things like he never existed. And when I cried, when I sobbed into his flannel shirt, she slapped me so hard my ear rang. Stop crying, she snapped. Tears won't bring back the dead. That was the first time she hit me. I didn't know then that it would become routine, that each time I looked too much like him, acted too soft, or sang too loudly she'd strike, or that silence would become my only shield. I thought I was grieving, but I was only entering a different kind of mourning, a slow, suffocating loss that would follow me for years. And still, deep inside me, something refused to go out, some tiny flicker my father left behind. I still remember the scent of motor oil and sawdust that clung to my father's jacket every evening when he came home from the shop. He'd set down his heavy lunch pail, kiss my forehead, and call me his little light, every night without fail. We'd sit on the back porch and watch the sun dip behind the cornfields, his hand gently resting on my shoulder like an anchor. Those were the days before the silence settled in, before his voice became just an echo in the walls of our house. Frankenmuth. Michigan was small enough that everyone knew your middle name, but big enough to hide in when you needed a moment alone. I loved that balance. As a child, I'd skip through the cobblestone streets in the town square with my braid bouncing behind me, my shoes scuffed from too much running and not enough watching where I was going. The bakery on Main Street always had fresh cinnamon rolls, and the owner, Mrs. Elkins, would give me the ones with the most icing if I promised to sing for her. And I did. I sang all the time. Daddy said I had a song in my soul, the kind of gift you don't learn you're born with. He'd come home from work, clean the grease from his hands, and sit beside me at our old upright piano. We didn't have a lot of money, but one Christmas, when I was 8, he traded a month's worth of overtime hours for that piano from a widow on Maple Street. He told me, "This house needs music. Sally, your voice makes it feel alive." It was true. When I sang, even Mama smiled sometimes. Back then, before everything changed, her laughter would ring through the halls, though it always felt more rehearsed than real. She was a stern woman, tidy to a fault, and never let her hair down even on Sundays. But when Daddy was around, there was a softness in her, a looseness in her jaw. I think he brought out the part of her that she forgot how to hold on to. Our house wasn't large, but it had charm. The kitchen smelled like apples and cinnamon in the fall, and in the winter, Daddy would stack firewood with such care you'd think he was building a cathedral. He taught me how to sharpen pencils with a pocket knife, how to tie a proper knot, and how to stand up straight even when I was scared. He called me brave. I didn't feel it then, but I clung to that word like it might grow roots in me someday. He'd say, "The world's going to try and bend you, Sal, but don't let it break you." You hear me? I heard him. I just didn't know what kind of bending was coming. Sundays were my favorite. We'd go to church early, Mama in her powder blue hat, Daddy in his pressed shirt, and me in the dress. Grandma Reynolds sewed from leftover fabric. After service, we'd visit the bakery, and Daddy would buy me one ginger cookie before we walked home, our boots crunching in the gravel. In the afternoons, he'd read me stories from a thick old Bible, his voice low and gentle, like wind through pine. I always thought he was invincible. One afternoon, when I was 9, I tripped on the steps and scraped my knee badly. Blood pooled just above my sock, and I cried out more from embarrassment than pain. Mama scolded me for being careless, told me to stop crying. But Daddy, he knelt down, cleaned the wound himself, and said, "You're allowed to feel. Sally, don't let anyone shame you for it." He looked up at Mama when he said that. She didn't say anything back. Even then, there were hints, fleeting moments where her eyes narrowed at his tenderness, where she flinched if he put a hand on her back too gently. She carried her grief for something long before he died. I just didn't know what it was yet. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at the wall while the rest of us laughed at one of Daddy's silly stories. She wasn't cruel then, not outright, but distant, cold like untouched snow. I didn't know how to reach her. I only knew that when Daddy hugged me, I didn't care. He worked hard. Harder than most men I knew, long days at the auto shop, 6 days a week, and still he had time to play checkers with me before bed. And every night, when I tucked myself in, I'd ask if he could sit just 5 more minutes. He always did, even when his eyes drooped from exhaustion. "I'll always be your safe place," he'd whisper, tucking the blanket under my chin. I believed him. I had to, because once he was gone, there was nowhere left that felt safe. But that's getting ahead of myself. In those golden years, before illness came knocking, Daddy made the world feel whole. Mama may have ruled the house with her rules and rituals, but Daddy gave it its soul. And I was just a girl with dirt on her knees, music in her heart, and a father who made the stars feel close enough to touch. Looking back, I can still feel the scratch of his work shirt against my cheek when he held me. I can still smell the faint mix of Old Spice and motor oil. And sometimes, when the wind comes through my garden just right, it carries the sound of his whistle, the first 4 notes of Amazing Grace. Those were the days before everything fell apart. And even though I didn't know it then, those memories would one day become the lifeline I'd cling to through the darkest years of my life. It was early spring when Daddy collapsed at the back of the shop. One moment he was lifting a tire onto the rack. The next, he was curled on the concrete floor, clutching his chest while the world spun out from under him. They said it was his heart, said it gave out after years of hard work and stress. But the truth was, it wasn't just his heart that broke. It was the glue that held our family together. I was only 10, but even I knew the way Mama looked at the floor during the funeral wasn't right. She didn't cry, not once. Her face was stone, her jaw tight, and when the pastor read his final words, I could swear I saw something in her eyes that scared me more than the death itself relief. It flashed for just a second, but I never forgot it. After the service, neighbors dropped off casseroles, hugged too tightly, and whispered soft condolences. Everyone assumed we'd grieve together. as a family. But as soon as the front door clicked shut behind us that night, Mama turned, stiff and controlled, and said, "Take off that black dress and hang it properly. We don't need to look like tragedy victims." Her voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it, cold, final. I stood frozen, my shoes still wet from the cemetery grass. I remember thinking that surely she was just overwhelmed. People process grief in strange ways, right? But then she turned to me, eyes narrowed, and said, "What are you staring at? Move, girl." That was the first time she called me girl instead of Sally. It felt like a door closing. That night, I pulled Daddy's flannel shirt from under my pillow and hugged it to my chest. It still smelled faintly of pine soap and smoke. I cried into it quietly, muffling the sound as best I could, but I wasn't quiet enough. The door creaked open, and Mama stood there in the dim hallway light. Her shadow stretched long across the floor. Still sniveling, she snapped, "He's gone. Get used to it." Then she yanked the shirt from my hands. "You want to keep babying yourself. You'll end up weak like him." She stormed off, leaving the door open behind her. I curled into myself, hollow and confused. I told myself she was just hurting. I told myself she'd come around. She didn't. In the weeks that followed, everything in the house changed. The laughter that once filled our kitchen disappeared like it had never been. Mama began removing every trace of Daddy, his photographs, his tools, his books. One morning, I woke up and the piano was gone. "Sold," she said. We don't have time for noise in this house. I was still expected to go to school, to bring home good grades, to behave. But now the rules were different, tighter, crueler. If I was 5 minutes late from school, she'd lock the door and leave me shivering on the porch. If I spilled a glass of milk, she'd slap my hand so hard the skin would sting for hours. When I cried, she told me I was being dramatic. When I stayed silent, she accused me of plotting something. Once, I left my homework folder on the kitchen table. When she saw it, she picked it up, flipped through the pages, and said, "You think you're smart, just like your father, always dreaming, always weak." Then she tore it in two. She didn't drink. She didn't scream. Her cruelty was cold and calculated. That made it worse. At school, I stopped talking. I kept my head down. Miss Atkins, my teacher, once asked if everything was all right at home. I nodded. What else could I do if I told the truth? I was terrified of what Mama would do, and if I lied, at least the pain stayed behind closed doors, where no one could look at it with pity. I began dreading the end of the school day. The long walk home along the gravel road felt like the slow descent into a place that no longer belonged to me. Home wasn't home anymore. It was a space I tiptoed through, praying not to make noise, not to draw attention. Mama no longer cooked real meals. Most evenings, she reheated canned soup and left it on the counter without a word. I ate in silence, washed my own bowl, and retreated to my room. But even there, I didn't feel safe. She could burst in at any time, inspect my room like a warden, criticize the way I folded clothes, accuse me of stealing, of disrespecting her, of being his little spy. Sometimes I'd stare at the ceiling and imagine what Daddy would say if he were still here. I'd pretend he'd open the door gently, sit at the edge of my bed, and say, "It's all right, baby girl, you're safe now." I'd hold on to that fantasy until my chest hurt, but fantasies don't protect you from bruises. One evening, I was humming to myself just a soft little tune I used to sing with Daddy. Mama was in the hallway and heard it. She barged into my room, eyes blazing. "You dare sing that filth, she screamed, the only time I remember her truly yelling. She grabbed my arm and shook me so hard I thought my shoulder would pop out of place. You don't get to remember him. He's gone. He left me. And you, her voice trembled. Now you're just the piece he forgot to take. She slapped me across the mouth. The sting faded. The words never did. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about grief. This was hate, and she had chosen me as the container for it. Every frustration, every resentment she'd carried for years, she now poured into me. She didn't just want to erase him. She wanted to erase the part of him she saw in me. I learned to stop singing. I stopped wearing anything yellow Daddy's favorite color. I avoided his side of the bed when I helped wash the sheets. I erased him out loud so I could keep him alive in secret. But some nights, when I was sure she was asleep, I'd pull the flannel shirt from where I'd hidden it beneath a loose floorboard and wrap myself in it, whispering, I remember, Daddy, I remember. Even if she tried to make me forget, I wouldn't let her. And though I didn't know it then, I was already beginning the long, quiet work of saving myself, one memory at a time. Mama's cruelty didn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It crept in like the slow chill of November air, sharp, seeping, quiet at first. I used to believe the worst thing that could ever happen to a girl was losing her daddy, but I was wrong. Far worse is losing the mother who's still alive. By the time I turned 11, the bruises were no longer surprises. They were expectations. I began counting days in silence, how many passed without a slap, how many where I got to eat a warm dinner, how many when Mama didn't find something in me that reminded her of the man she claimed ruined her life. The answer was always the same, not many. The first time she locked me out in the snow, I stood barefoot on the porch in just my nightgown. She said I'd been disrespectful for leaving the bathroom light on. That was the punishment. I stood shivering, my teeth chattering, watching the frost bite into the railing. Minutes felt like hours. When she finally opened the door, she didn't say a word, just tossed me a towel and told me to clean the footprints I'd left. I wasn't her daughter anymore. I was her prisoner, her outlet, her regret. At school, I wore long sleeves even in May. I became an expert at smiling without showing teeth, speaking without sharing, surviving without screaming. I'd learned early on that no one wanted to know the truth, not really. And those who suspected, they preferred to look away. Because what do you say to a little girl who flinches when someone raises a hand to wave? I remember one afternoon. Miss Atkins stopped me in the hallway after class. She knelt to my level and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. Sally, she whispered, if something's going on at home, you can tell me. I opened my mouth, but the words didn't come, because I knew what would happen if they did. Mama once told me, if you ever tell someone lies about me, I'll make sure they never find your body. I don't know if she meant it, but I didn't dare find out. The emotional beatings were just as cruel. She tore up my homework in front of me, saying smart girls end up with broken hearts like your daddy's. She forbade me from looking in the mirror, claiming vanity was sin. She made me scrub the floors with a toothbrush until my knuckles bled. I remember her yelling, on your knees, like the servant you are. But the worst was the silence. She'd go days without saying a word to me. She'd pass me in the hallway as if I were a ghost. The punishment wasn't always pain. It was being made invisible, like I didn't matter enough to hate. Sometimes I'd whisper to myself at night, just to remember what my voice sounded like, but nothing prepared me for the night of my 12th birthday. I had dared to ask if I could bake a cake for myself. Not a party, not candles, just something small, something sweet. Mama's eyes narrowed. You think you deserve cake. You think birthdays are for girls who whine, who cry, who ruin their fathers. I tried to apologize. I always did, but she wasn't listening. She grabbed my wrist and dragged me to the basement. That place always scared me cold, damp, full of shadows. She pushed me onto the cement floor and threw the bag of flour beside me. Make your cake down here, she hissed. Let's see how sweet you can be when the rats are watching. She locked the door behind her. I sat there for hours in the dark. The flour burst open and covered my legs, my arms, my face. I must have looked like a ghost. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there hugging my knees, rocking slowly and singing under my breath, the same song Daddy used to hum while fixing engines. Amazing Grace. My voice cracked on the second verse, but I kept going. When she finally opened the door, she stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Maybe she didn't. Maybe, deep down, she'd convinced herself that the girl she'd given birth to had died with her husband, and all that remained was a shadow she had every right to strike. After that night, something broke inside me. I didn't try to be good anymore. I didn't try to make her love me. Instead, I watched. I waited, and I held on to the tiny, flickering hope that somewhere out there, the world wasn't like this. That maybe, just maybe. There were places where mothers didn't hate their daughters, where singing wasn't a crime, where asking for a cake didn't mean punishment. But hope is a dangerous thing in a house like that. It can get you hurt. One evening, about a month after the basement incident, I came home from school with a slip of paper, a flyer for choir auditions. I had tucked it into my math book, hidden, but Mama found it. She called me to the living room, the paper in her hand, her face unreadable. You still think you're special? She asked. I said nothing. She walked over to me and held out the flyer like it was poison. You think your voice is a gift? You think anyone wants to hear the child of a dead coward sing like a saint? Then she did something she hadn't done before. She slapped me across the face, then again and again, 3 times. And then she stood back and whispered, Go ahead, try to sing now. My lips trembled, but no sound came out. She smiled. She had won at least that day, that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, my cheeks swollen, my soul quiet. I touched my throat and felt only emptiness. No melody, no music, but deep in my chest, I still felt something, like a pulse, like a memory, like a seed buried under winter snow, waiting. I wasn't gone. Not yet. She may have silenced me, but someday I would sing again, louder, braver, not for her, not for the world, but for the little girl I used to be, the one who still believed her father's words. The world may try to bend you, Sally, but don't let it break you. By the time I turned 13, I had mastered the art of invisibility. I knew which floorboards creaked and how to step around them. I knew how to eat quietly, how to breathe softly, how to make myself so small in my mother's presence that I barely existed at all. Some nights, I thought maybe that would be easier if I simply faded into nothing. But there's a truth no one tells you when a child learns to survive in silence. She also learns to listen deeply. And in that silence, something started to grow inside me. Not fear, not hatred, something more dangerous than both. Resolve. It began, as many things do, with a whisper, a simple, unremarkable moment that sparks a wildfire. It was a Tuesday, just after the first snow of winter. I came home to find Mama in the kitchen, scrubbing the counter like it had wronged her. The house smelled like bleach and anger. My boots left tiny puddles near the door as I slipped them off. I didn't speak. I never did, unless spoken to. She looked up and scowled. "You tracked mud in," she said flatly. "It's snow," I replied before I could stop myself. "It melts." The room went still. She stood there, sponge dripping in her hand, eyes narrowing like storm clouds. Then she moved quick, practiced. Her hand met my cheek before I could blink. The slap was sharp, but it wasn't the pain that made my breath catch. It was the sound. It was the last time I flinched. Because when she hit me that time, something snapped. Not my skin, not a bone, but something deeper, an invisible thread that had been pulled tight for 3 years too long. I straightened. I didn't cry, and for the first time in my life, I looked my mother straight in the eyes. "You can hit me again," I said quietly, "but it won't make you feel better. It won't bring him back." She froze for a heartbeat. I thought she'd hit me harder. I even braced for it, but she didn't. Instead, she stepped back, like I'd slapped her with truth. I walked past her, up the stairs, and locked my door. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't bury my face in a pillow or hide under my quilt. I sat at my desk and opened the drawer where I kept my father's flannel shirt. I hadn't touched it in months. I lifted it to my face and breathed in the last traces of him. They were faint now, but still there, still enough. I made a plan. It wasn't grand. It wasn't cinematic. It was the kind of plan a 13-year-old girl who had nothing and no one could make. First, I saved what I could. Loose coins Mama left lying around. A few dollars I'd found in the pocket of a winter coat she never wore. It wasn't much, but it was something. Second, I watched. I learned her patterns. When she went to bed, when she was out back hanging laundry, how long it took her to fall asleep after her nightly cup of tea. Third, I waited. 2 weeks later, I saw my chance. It was a Friday, cold and dark. She'd had 2 glasses of red wine, a rare indulgence that left her slower than usual. I packed a small bag with the essentials, the flannel shirt, a pair of socks, a toothbrush, a photo of Daddy and me tucked behind a faded Bible page. At 1:12 a.m., I crept down the stairs. I knew better than to use the front door. The lock squeaked. Instead, I slipped out the side entrance, past the overgrown garden where Daddy used to grow tomatoes, and into the freezing air. No one was waiting. No light turned on behind me. I walked 2 miles down the snow-covered road, guided only by the moonlight and my memories. I knocked on the door of the only person I believed might still remember me as something other than broken Mrs. Atkins, my old teacher. When she opened the door and saw me standing there half frozen, lips blue, eyes hollow, she didn't ask questions. She pulled me inside, wrapped me in a blanket, and said, "You're safe now." And for the first time in years, I believed it. The days that followed were a blur of warmth and fear. Warmth, because Mrs. Atkins didn't just take me in, she fought for me. She called social services. She drove me to appointments. She sat beside me while I gave my statement to the officer, whose pen kept trembling every time I described another scar. Fear, because I knew Mama would come looking, and she did. 3 days later, she showed up at the school where they'd placed me temporarily. She stormed the office, demanding they return her daughter. But I wasn't her daughter anymore. The counselors knew. The bruises were enough. The therapist's notes were enough. And I, finally, was enough. They issued a protection order. She wasn't allowed near me, but that didn't stop her from sending letters. "You ruined me." One said, "Your father would be ashamed." Another read, "I didn't respond. I never would." Instead, I started therapy. I started drawing again. I even hummed once when I thought no one was listening. It was shaky, fragile, but it was mine. Mrs. Atkins offered to become my legal guardian. She had no children of her own, and when the court asked if I wanted to stay with her, I said yes before they even finished the sentence. In that small yellow house with the green shutters and warm fireplace, I began the slow, painful work of becoming someone again. I wasn't just a girl who escaped. I was a girl who refused to be erased. One night, months later, I found myself alone in Mrs. Atkins' living room. The piano she kept there was dusty, unused. I sat down. My fingers hovered over the keys, uncertain. Then, slowly, softly, I played. It was clumsy. It was halting. But when I reached the second verse of Amazing Grace, my voice came out, thin and cracked and trembling. I didn't stop. I kept singing because I wasn't afraid anymore, because that voice, however small, was mine, and it had waited long enough to be heard. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't come with a sunrise or a single kind word. It comes in inches, in whispered reassurances. In nights when you cry without hiding your face. In mornings when you wake up and realize you're no longer afraid. That's what it was like for me at 13, living in Mrs. Atkins' home on the quiet side of Frankenmuth. The same streets I used to walk with my head down now felt different, not safe, not yet, but possible. The first thing she did was give me space, not just physically, emotionally. She never forced me to talk, never asked too many questions. She let me sit in silence during dinner. She let me cry during church hymns without pressing for an explanation, and maybe that was her greatest gift. She allowed me to be broken because she knew that healing starts when someone sees your cracks and doesn't turn away. Mrs. Atkins set up therapy sessions with a woman named Rebecca. She was tall, with silver streaks in her dark hair and the kind of voice that made you feel like the world might still hold good things. I didn't trust her at first. How could I? But she never pushed. Week after week, she just waited while I traced the hem of my sleeve or stared out her window. Then one day, she said, "You're not what she said you were." I looked up. She smiled gently. "You're not too much. You're not unlovable, and you're not broken beyond repair." That was the first day I spoke more than 5 words in her office. And it wasn't about the abuse. It was about the color of the flowers outside her window. They were yellow. My father's favorite. It felt like a sign. School was harder. I'd missed so much, academically and socially. Most kids didn't know what to say to me. Some whispered. Some avoided me entirely. Others asked too many questions. Their curiosity laced with pity I couldn't stomach. But I focused on the things I could control. I studied. I worked hard. I wrote essays with too much emotion and solved math problems with trembling hands. Slowly, teachers began to notice. Not just my grades, but my hunger for structure, for affirmation, for something solid under my feet. I joined the school library club. It was the quietest place on campus, and I could lose myself in the books there. I devoured novels about girls who overcame odds, stories with endings that offered more than escape. They offered survival and music. Oh, music. Mrs. Atkins had that upright piano tucked away in the front room, collecting dust. One evening, she caught me staring at it. She didn't say a word, just opened the lid, gave me a small nod, and left me there. I sat, I played, and the sound, hesitant and uneven at first, filled the house. From that night on, I played every chance I got. My fingers remembered the melodies before my heart did. Sometimes I sang, low and careful, afraid of the echoes, but the notes came easier with time, like they were waiting, just like me. Rebecca encouraged me to audition for the school's spring recital. I said no 3 times before finally whispering, maybe. Mrs. Atkins beamed when I showed her the permission slip. The recital hall was small. The stage lights weren't even bright. But the moment I stepped in front of that piano, something shifted. The room disappeared. All I could feel was the weight of my father's hand on my shoulder, the memory of his voice in my ear. Let them hear you, Sal. So I sang. And afterward, after the claps and the stunned silence, something cracked open inside me. It wasn't pain, it was pride. As I grew older, I kept building. I got my first part-time job at 16, helping out at a florist shop downtown. I loved being around life again, colors, fragrance, growth. The owner, a kind woman named June, taught me how to arrange bouquets and care for delicate orchids. She said I had a gentle touch. No one had ever called my touch gentle before. At 17, I applied to a community college in Saginaw, 20 minutes away. Mrs. Atkins cried when I got in, not loud sobs, just a quiet hand to her mouth. Eyes full of something I hadn't seen since my daddy's funeral. Joy. I studied early childhood education. I wanted to work with kids not just to teach, but to see them, to be the adult I needed when I was young. I knew what it meant to be overlooked, unheard. I swore no child in my classroom would ever feel invisible. College wasn't easy. There were nights I cried over textbooks, days I felt too anxious to raise my hand. But I kept going. Rebecca still saw me once a month, even after I turned 18. She helped me navigate the moments when memories came back too sharp, too vivid. She reminded me, again and again, you're safe now, and you're allowed to grow. I took her words seriously. By 22, I had a degree. By 23, a classroom of my own. Tiny desks, finger paints, laughter. Sometimes I'd catch a little girl staring at me the way I used to stare at teachers I couldn't trust. And I'd kneel down, gently, and say, you're not alone. Not while I'm here. It wasn't a miracle. It was work. But it was beautiful. When I turned 25, I bought a small cottage near the edge of Frankenmuth. It had a wraparound porch and space for a piano. Mrs. Atkins helped me move in. She was older now, grayer, slower, but her spirit hadn't dimmed. We sat on the porch that first night, watching the stars. You've come so far, she said softly. I nodded, because someone believed I could. She smiled, her eyes shining. And now it's your turn to believe in others. I never heard from my mother again. She didn't come to court, didn't try to fight the termination of her parental rights. She vanished from my life like smoke, but not from my memories. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing how the past lives in you. For me, it lives as a warning and a promise that I will never be what she was, that I will never raise my voice in cruelty or strike from fear, that I will keep singing even when the world feels dark, and above all, that I will build a life my father would be proud of. And every time I sit at that piano, I know he's listening, sometimes late at night. I still dream of that small, silent girl sitting on the basement floor, dusted in flour, her song crushed in her throat. But when I wake, I no longer cry for her. I get up, I make a cup of tea, and I sit by my piano, because that girl was me, and she survived. It's been over 40 years since I walked out of that house, barefoot in the snow, since I stood on Mrs. Atkins' porch with nothing but a flannel shirt and a heart full of fear. And yet, it feels like just yesterday that my mother's voice echoed in my mind, convincing me I was unworthy of love, of safety, of peace. She doesn't live in my head anymore. I do, and I've made that space sacred. These days, I spend my mornings teaching music to children who carry their own heavy stories. Some come from broken homes. Some carry silent wounds. But when they sit at my piano and place their tiny fingers on the keys, I see sparks just like the ones my father saw in me. We don't just learn notes and scales. We learn breath. We learn courage. We learn that our voices matter, that they matter. Every Christmas, I gather my students for a small recital in my living room. Parents, neighbors, strangers from the church, they all crowd in. And when the last child sings and the applause fills the house, I always step up, smile gently, and sing the song that saved me, Amazing Grace. I used to sing it through tears. Now I sing it through strength. Mrs. Atkins passed away 5 years ago. I sat by her side in her final days, held her hand like she once held mine. Before she closed her eyes for the last time, she whispered, "You made it, Sally. You built the life you deserved." And I did, because someone believed in me, because I chose not to let my story end in pain, because I knew somewhere, deep inside, that love doesn't hurt and silence doesn't heal. It took years of work, years of therapy, years of building trust, brick by brick. But now, when I look in the mirror, I see not just a survivor. I see a teacher, a daughter, a woman who learned how to rise. And now I want to pass that light on. No matter how long the darkness has lasted, the dawn can still find you. You are not the names they called you. You are not the scars they left behind. You are not broken. You are becoming. If you are living through silence, through fear, through shame, please know your story doesn't end there. You have the right to speak, to sing, to be seen. And most of all, you have the right to be loved in a way that never hurts. If my story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you once were, or someone you know, please take a moment to share it. Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I want to hear your voice. I want you to know you're not alone. And if you believe that healing is possible no matter how long it takes, don't forget to subscribe. Because here, we don't just survive. We rise together.